what are just some basic commands? So I'm going to show you these, and then once I show them to you, I'm actually going to demo these commands. So the first thing is, I want to know what version you're on. Very simple command, git space dash dash, and it is 2 dashes, so it's dash dash version. And that's something to watch out for in Git, is that a lot of the options that you have that you add to it will begin with a dash dash. There's a few out there that will have just a single dash. So git dash space dash dash version will give you what version you're actually working on. To make a repository, a local repository, we're going to use a command called git init. And so what git init does is you have a folder, and I want to start tracking all the information that's in that folder. The first thing I have to do is I have to go in and I type in the command git init inside that folder in the command line. And then that's going to make my repository for me. Now, the key thing to know here is all that does is makes the repository. That doesn't start tracking any files. So if you go and you make a file inside that folder after you run the git init command, it's not being tracked. There's other commands that we have to do to make sure those files are being tracked that are there. We can also clone a repository. And when you clone a repository, you can think of, a lot of people will do this. If you guys ever deal with the DevNet information for Cisco, DevNet or Cisco DevNet has a repository that's on GitHub that you can pull information down from. So you can actually go from a command line, you can type in git clone and the URL of that repository, and it will actually clone. In other words, it takes a full copy of everything that's in that repository and pulls it down to your local computer. And now you've got everything that's in it, right? And you can start working on that code that's there. And another code that you can, or command you can use, is a git remote add origin in the URL of the repository. Now, where this is helpful is if you have a remote repository, we can do what's called push and pull. In other words, if I want to pull all the latest code down from a branch, I can use a git pull command. If I want to push code, the latest code I've got on my computer up to the remote repository, it's a git push command. If I don't want to have to type that URL in every time, I can run this command. I can go git remote add origin in the URL, hit enter, and what it does, it actually saves that URL into the config file. And then when I start doing that push-pull, I can do that push-pull to the origin, and I don't have to type the URL in every time. So it's basically saves me from having to know that every time I want to push or pull something down, it's there. So those are some very basic commands. Some other basic commands that you need to know: git dash dash help, so git space dash dash help, or git in the command with 1 dash and an H. Git dash dash help actually shows you all the commands that are available to you, all the major commands. And then you can add I think it's git help dash A will actually show you all the subcommands or options that are available to you. Git command dash H would be, let's say I don't know what all my options are for the commit command. I can go git commit dash H, and it's going to show me all my options. It's going to tell me what that commit command does, and it's also going to show me the syntax and what all my options are that's available for that. From a configuration standpoint, one of the first things you have to do is once you make your repository is Git has to know who's making changes, and so it wants to know your email address and it wants to know your name. So when you make that commit, that snapshot, it's going to tie your name and your email to it, the date it was made. So there's two ways you can do this. You can do this per repository, or you can do this globally on your computer. That will be applied to all repositories on your computer. If you want to do it per repository, it's just a git config user-email or user-name, and then you give it your email or name. If you want to do it globally, then in front of the user email and username, you go --global, and that will set it globally. And then I can look at that config. If I go git config --list, it's going to show me that config, right? And then one of the probably the most important things to know is Q actually quits out of a function. So once I get into, like, if I start running the git help command and it's a really long, if I want to cancel out of it, I just hit Q, and that's going to pull me out of it back to the prompt. All right, so let's just look at some of this. I'm going to pull up a command line. And the first thing I'm going to do is I just want to know what version that I'm running here, right? So I'm going to type in git --version, and you'll notice it tells me that I am on 2.26.2. If I want to start looking and doing, let's say I just want to do a clone. So this one I'm going to clone down. Here is my Git repository. And if you want to know, all you got to do is you go to Git, you can sign up for it, it's free. It will make a repository for you, and you can start saving files in it. All right. If you want to know what the URL is for your repository, once you're inside your repository, there's a little green button over here that says clone or download, and you'll notice it will give you what your URL is. So I'm going to make a copy of it. And then what I can do is I can come over here and I can go git clone. I'm going to type in that repository, and I'm going to hit enter. And you'll notice it actually goes out and pulls down that information for me. Now, the first time you do it, if it's probably going to ask you for a password, and then after that, you don't have to worry about it. But if I start looking now and I just do a dir, you'll notice that it pulled down this folder called class. So that was actually, my repository was actually a class repository. And if I go into class, you'll notice that it actually pulled two files down. It pulled a file.py down and actually pulled a README down. So if I go back, and you'll notice, well, first thing, you'll notice one thing you don't see is you don't see the repository, right? And I told you that, you know, when it makes a repository is actually hidden. So if I go dir/AH, you'll notice here that AH actually shows me all hidden information, all hidden files. It actually shows me that there is a directory here called .git. You just can't see it. And that's where all your snapshots are being made. That's right there. So that's very simple. Just to pull information down is very easy to do. And then once you do that, you could actually do that git remote add origin command with that URL in there, and that's going to save it in the config file. And then at that point, you can do push and pulls, so git push or git pull, and you can push information to your repository if you want to, or pull information to your repository. Just to do a very simple clone, that's really all it takes to get started. What if I want to, let's say I don't have a remote repository and I just want to make something local, which is really all most of us need to do. I mean, unless we're working with a team, we can do everything locally on our computer. So I'm going to use VS Code just because it's easy to show. And I'm going to add a workspace folder here, and my workspace folder is Athena Webinars and Git class, and we're going to do Git demo here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a file in, and we're just going to call this file1.py. And I'm just going to add some very simple code here. So we'll say something like x equals 1, y equals 2, and then if x equals 1, we're going to print x is equal to 1. So something very simple, right? And I'm going to go up, I'm going to go File, and I'm going to save this. Now, the thing is all I've got here is I've got a folder with a file in it. That's it, nothing else. I mentioned what we have to do. We have to tell Git to make a repository in this file so that it will start tracking information. And I said the way that we do that is a command called git init. So we'll do git init, and we'll hit enter. And it tells me that it is initializing an empty Git repository. Now, it's actually not empty. We know there's a file in it, but basically what it's saying is, look, I'm making a repository, but we're not tracking anything. There's nothing in it we're tracking, right? The other thing that you'll notice here, and this is something that if you guys use VS Code, there's actually a plugin for Git, and you'll notice that over on the left-hand side, as I make changes to these files, you're going to see my files change colors, and you're going to see these little icons, whether it be a U or M, added. What I've done now is I have basically taken my folder and I've run git init, which basically said, hey, make a repository so we can start tracking files. And you'll notice again, if I do dir, I don't see the repository because it's hidden, but I do see that I've still got my file 1.py. I mentioned that we run this git init, right? And what this git init does is it makes this local repository in this folder, and you've got your working directory, which is basically your files that you're working on. They're not tracked automatically, right? So just because I have a local repository doesn't mean they're tracked. Actually, what happens is I have to tell Git to track files. The very first thing that I do when I go and I make a file is I have to run this command called git add. And there's two ways I can run git add. The easy way would be git add space dot. And git add space dot basically says take everything in the working directory and add it to this area called staging. Or I can do git add space and just the file name. And that will take one specific file and add it to the staging area. Think about a staging area as a location that's going to hold the files that we want to commit until we get ready to commit them. And it's very useful because maybe what happens is I'm working on 2 or 3 files, 2 or 3 different codes, and at the end of the day, I've got one finished, and I don't want to commit the other ones. I just want to commit this one where I can just add one to the staging area. So what happens is we go git add space dot, it adds it to the staging area. Once we add it to the staging area, we can run this command called git status. Git status tells us what files we're tracking, what files have been added to the staging area, and what files we're not tracking. So think about it, it's kind of giving us information from the staging area back to the working directory. When we get ready to commit that or make that snapshot and save it in the repository, we run a command called git commit. And so it goes git commit -m, and we give it the message. And the message is going to be what's changed in the file. What information, if somebody goes and looks at this commit, what is it that they need to know about this commit while we saved it, right? So that's going to be the message so you can keep up with that. Another command you can do is you can actually use git commit -a, and that actually skips the staging area. So that's going to take everything that's in your working directory and it's going to commit it to the local repository. When you go git commit -a in VS Code, it actually pops up and asks you for a message. You type in your message and hit save. Git Log shows you all the information in the repository. So it's going to show you all of your commits. There are two, there's a git push origin and a git pull origin branch, and this is the ones where I was saying once you do that URL, you want to make sure that if I don't have to type it in again, I can go in, I can do the git remote add origin and the URL to it, and then here when I go git push origin and the branch, what branch I want to push it to, I can actually do that, and I don't have to retype it in. It just makes it easier for me, right? And then we've got some other commands that I'm going to show you, such as git checkout, git reset hard checkout or code ID, and then git difference. So these commands here, the git checkout allows me to check out any of the snapshots that are there. The key thing about Git checkout with the code ID is it doesn't belong to if I check it out, it doesn't belong to a branch that way, but it doesn't belong anywhere. And it's basically just used if I want to check out a code, look at it to see, hey, what was I doing here, and then go away from it, right? I'm not really going to be making changes to it in a feature branch or in a bug fix or something like that. The Git reset hard with the code ID is if I want to delete maybe the latest code and go back to an older code. So, for example, maybe I've saved or committed and made a snapshot, and then I've realized that, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. I don't really want to do this. I want to go back to my previous snapshot, my previous commit, and I can do that by going Git reset --hard, and the code ID I want to go back to, and it will go back to the previous one. Now, the key thing to know there is that's a very dangerous command, and it's dangerous because as soon as you run that command, any commits that is before the code ID that you go back to is being deleted. It's gone. That's just something to keep in mind. The Git checkout --dot allows me, if I'm making changes in my working directory and I realize, hey, you know what, I don't want any of these changes I've done. I haven't done an add to add it to the staging, and I haven't done a commit to commit it yet. I can just run this Git checkout --dot, and it basically will just put everything back to the way that the latest code was. And then Git diff, and Git diff is actually, it's Git diff with the code ID of the first code you want to look at and the code ID of the second code you want to look at, and it actually shows you the difference. So if I've got a couple of different commits out there and I don't know really what the difference is, it will actually come back and tell me, hey, here are the differences in these two codes. One file that is in this folder, right, and if I go Git status right now, you'll see that this file is in red. And right above it, it says that, first thing it says that I'm on the master branch. So it's going to tell you what branch you're on. It says I have no commits yet. And it says, look, you've got this file that is in this folder that's not being tracked. So we're not keeping up at the moment with any information that you're changing in it. So what we want to do is we want to add this file to the staging area to get it ready to commit. So very simple, I can go Git add space dot, and it just kind of runs through its little thing. And if I go Git status again, you'll now see that the file has changed colors on me. So it's gone from red to green. And also you'll notice that up here where I've got in my little extension open editor, I've got file1.py. It's actually changed from a U where it wasn't been tracking to A. So we've basically what it means is we've added it, right? So now it's in the staging area. And so if I want to commit this, commit -m, and I give it some message that allows us to know what exactly, why we committed this. What is it that's important about this? I'm just going to say, this is my first file, and hit enter. And you'll notice here, the one thing I forgot to do is when I made this, it tells me, look, when I hit it says, look, you got to tell me who you are, right? Because I'm not going to save these files if I don't know who the author is that's saving them. So I'm going to go Git config user.name, and we'll give it my name. And then I'm going to go Git config user.email, and I'm going to give it my email. If we go back and run this commit again, you should see that it says, okay, we've got the master. This file has been committed to the master, and there's been one file changed. And so basically what I just did there was I took a file that was in this folder that wasn't being tracked. I did an add command, a git add command that says, hey, add this to the staging area. We want to start tracking this file. And then the commit command we did basically took a snapshot of it and saved it in the repository. Okay, well, let's go back and run git status again. And you'll notice that If I look at Git status, it tells me that, hey, there's nothing in the working tree. It's clean. There's nothing to commit, meaning that, hey, we are tracking this file. You have committed any changes that was made to that file. Git Log, I said, looks at basically the repository. And the way that Git keeps up with these snapshots, these commits, is by an ID. So you'll notice here is the ID for this commit. And it says, hey, this is the head, and it's pointing to master. Now, what that means, the term head basically means that this is the latest code. This is the last one that's been updated. And the master means that this is on the master branch. That's there. You'll also notice that it gives me who the author is. It also tells me what the date was. And right below it, it says, this is my first file. So it tells me exactly all the information I need to know about that specific snapshot. Now, if we start making some changes, let's add some stuff in here. So let's do a print, and we'll do the one that everybody does when they first learn Python, which is hello world, and we save it. So you'll notice that now my file one over to the left-hand side says modified, so it's got an M. And then what I want to do now is I want to go git add dot, because I want to add this to the staging area. And I'm going to commit this, and we're going to say added hello world. And it saves it. So now I can go back and look at my Git log, and you'll now see that I have two commits. Right? So I've got my first commit, which is at the bottom down here, which is this is my first file. And then it has my second commit, which is now the head. This is the latest one, and it says added hello world. And let's just make one more. We'll make one more change here just so we can get another commit. And we'll go z equals 3. And I'll go save. And then I'm going to add this, and then we'll commit this, and then I'm going to go git log, and now you'll notice that I have 3 commits in, and obviously the added z equals 3 is my latest one. That is my head. Now, let's say I want to go back and I want to look at the second one, the one that says added hello world. So all I want to do is I want to do a checkout. Now, there's a couple I want you to watch here. The code I've got at the top, right? So right now you'll look at print hello world. I got X, Y, Z, and I've got my if statement. But if I go git checkout, and I check out this code here, and I hit enter, you'll notice that at the top, my code changed. Right, because the checkout, basically I checked out a code that had a different configuration. It was different from the latest one. So that z equals 3 went away. That's there. So I can actually look at this. Now, the problem with this, using this specific thing, is you'll notice in right here when I ran the command, it says you are in detached head. That basically means, look, you've pulled this code, but you're not in any branch at all. You're just looking at this code is all you're doing. So I can look at it, and then what I want to do is I want to go back to the master branch. So I can go git checkout, and I'm going to tell it that I want to go back to the master. And it tells me I'll switch back to the master. And if I look at git log, you'll notice here that, hey, I'm back to where I started out with, right? And even my code at the top, I still have my z equals 3 that's there. So I can actually go look at a bunch of different codes that are there. That makes it nice. Let's say I want to get rid of a code. Let's say I don't like, I want to go back to the second one, the second commit that's there. If I go git reset -- hard, and I'm going to copy the commit I want to go back to. And I hit enter, it now tells me that that is the head. Matter of fact, if I go git log, you'll notice I only have 2. So when I said, it allows me to go back, the key thing about this command is, look, it is deleting anything that is above that specific commit that I've made. So you want to be very careful in doing that. The other thing we can do is, let's say I want to know what the difference between these 2 commits are that I've got. I can go git diff, and then I can just copy these 2, because I want to know what are the 2 files that I want to know the difference in. I hit enter, and it actually comes back and tells me what the 2 files, what's different in the 2 files. So you'll notice that anything that is the negative, they've got 3 little dashes, that means file number 1 or file A. Anything with the plus is file B. So you'll see that I've got a plus print hello world, which means that the difference between A and B is basically we added this print statement. So it gives me a very easy way to look at the differences in two commits that are out there.